Minecraft has minecarts and LEGO makes trains, and if we combine them, well, you'll see. If I use gear racks on this track and then make the wheels of the minecart gears, it should make the minecart run along the track like it does in game. First up, we're going to need some rails. A Minecraft block is 16 pixels on every side, so I'm going to make each LEGO stud a pixel. With the dimensions established, it would make sense if I use a bunch of these 2x16 plates as each tie on the rail, and then add some more plates running in the opposite direction for the minecart to run along. That's a great start, but for this to look like it does in the game, I'm going to need to make each tie brown. But I already used most of my dark tan tiles on my piston. Alright, now that I have acquired the right pieces, I can start adding them to the ties and make them the right color. I had to destroy my piston even more to get the right amount, but with the inside of the tracks done, I now need to add some 1x2 tiles on each of the tie. And with that, the brown look is complete, but in order for the minecart to run along the tracks, it's going to need something a little better than random studs. So my plan is to use these gear racks along each rail, and then make the tires of the minecart these gears so that when the minecart gets powered, it has traction and runs along the track. I only had enough pieces to make 5 16x16 tracks, but it should be enough to run the minecart. Now I need to make the rails better for the minecart. The only problem is that I don't think I'm going to have enough of these gear racks for both sides of the track. But I think that the dipped part of each gear rack is the same height as a tile, so if I space each gear rack out by 2 studs and alternate each side so that any given point on each side of the cart is engaged in a gear, it should be able to always push itself forward. But that's if I even have enough gear racks to do that. So I was hoping to not need this black one, but naturally I happen to be exactly 1 gear short, so just ignore the ugliness. Then I realized that I put an entire row on the wrong side of the rail, so let's fix that. With that done, I also need to add a higher up section on the rail to make sure the minecart stays on track. So if I use these long plates and tiles, I can make a sort of small barrier to stop it from running off. And speaking of barriers, there isn't one between you and the subscribe button, so you should click it. Anyways, now that the rails are done, I need to make some sort of base to go underneath them. I have plans to make it a lush cave over the middle with 2 different biomes on either side. It doesn't make sense, but you'll see. I started building that, but quickly realized I probably don't have enough pieces, and it probably wouldn't look good anyways. I tried propping up base plates on their sides for a platform to build off of, but it was already looking bad, so I scrapped the idea and went with something that would be much simpler. I decided that instead of the more complex lush cave, I would just build blocks underneath the minecart. And since they were already gray and green plates beneath the rails, I went with grass and stone blocks. So I added a bunch of plant pieces, basically all the ones off my piston, and added a bunch of spread out 1x2 tiles in dark gray and light gray on the stone side to mimic the stone texture. And now that that's finished, I have a really good looking minecart track without a minecart, which means now it's time to build the working minecart. Because it's not going to be very heavy, I'm going to use my smallest motor. I made a small frame and put the gears on as the wheels. Okay, so it runs, but I want to make it way cooler than that. I want there to be mineshaft pillars on either side of the track, so that when the minecart hits each one, it can reverse, so it's basically an infinite loop. This battery box has a switch that can slide in 2 directions, so if it's flipped the opposite way, it will reverse the motor. I think if I use this to my advantage, I can make a sort of button that when the minecart runs into something, it pushes itself enough to switch directions and start moving the other way. I built up the mechanics and luckily found that the height of the small motor with this pinhole is perfect to have these 2 gears line up. And with the small gear on top, it makes the perfect ratio so that the minecart doesn't roll too fast or too slow. But it looks like a frame and a motor, not a minecart, so I need to make it look a lot better. I started by building some walls all around the sides with these bracket pieces and then added some plates of the right size to make the walls. But before I go on, I need to figure out how to fit the battery box. I tried every thinkable direction. Upright, sideways and upside down, backwards, but nothing would work. Then I had an actually pretty good idea. I know, the next Albert Einstein. Because the only way to sort of fit the battery box is to have it upright, if I make it a furnace minecart, then it would have room inside the furnace for the battery box. Plus, I could fit into the fact that the minecart is running on its own. Now that I fit everything inside the minecart, I can test it. Okay, so it kinda works, but the motor doesn't have enough grip to stay in place after a couple reverses. Every time the motor changes direction, it means the gears have to reverse almost instantly, and the motor, which is only secured by 4 studs, can't hold on for very long. Then I built this little platform thing on top that was supposed to hold it in place, but that didn't really work either. Okay, while I'm putting off actually making the mechanics work, I'm gonna make the sides of the minecart actually look like the in-game texture. I used a bunch of 1x1 flat tiles and dark gray to make the texture the game has, but after just 1.5 sides I ran out, so I resorted to using 1x1 plates with the studs, and barely finished 3 of the sides. At this point I clearly did not have enough for the 4th side, so I just left it blank, because it would be the side facing the back anyways. Then I filled it with light gray tiles. But with that done, there was no more time to push it off. It was mechanism time. I came to the realization that I was going to have to use a different motor, a different size motor altogether. Can't think of any problems that would occur because of that? Well, think again. Because the motor is larger, I have to figure out a new way to hook it in, and it sticks out 1 stud more than the smaller motor, which means the battery box no longer fits in the spot I fit earlier. And since the motor is thicker, the same beautiful, simple, elegant gear ratio that worked so well before no longer fits. And since the gear ratio doesn't fit, I have to use a slightly bigger gear on top. It makes the minecart go way too fast. Oh, and did I mention that the gear and spacers on the driver axle all have to be rearranged as well? Alrighty, now that I have a couple simple problems to fix, let's begin this fun, enjoyable task. I figured out that I can stick the battery box on its side like this, and then use these Technic pins with studs on one end as a way to clip it in. Then, if I use these pieces, I can hook the motor down in the minecart in a much sturdier way than using studs. And with the motor in place, I can clip the battery box into these pieces. Now that's most of the problems pretty much solved, except one. It's way too fast. I tried using the smallest gear, but it wouldn't line up with any other gear I have, so next I tried using rubber bands on these wheels as a way to not have to worry about the gears lining up, and just have a tighter rubber band bridging the gap. It works, but it isn't powerful enough to reverse itself, barely pushing the switch off enough to stop itself. I tried a tighter rubber band, but that didn't work either. Then I just decided to keep it fast. The gears lined up so well, and I clearly wasn't going to be able to replicate it easily. But I still need to build the furnace part of the minecart, so I got to work. I started by using these Technic half beams and pins and built an outline for where the furnace would go. Then, by using these Technic pins, I made a platform and started building up the furnace. I basically copied what I did for my piston, just on a smaller scale. I used gray and dark gray to make the cobblestone texture, and then black in the corners. I also added an opening part using black, and with that done, all I had to do was make the reversing mechanism. Simply by sticking this Technic beam on the battery box so that it can be hit and reversed, then I added the top out of the furnace and started tiling it. So I need one more 1x1 gray tile, but I'm completely out. This should satisfy anyone with OCD. But with that done, I just made a fully working Minecraft minecart. But this is a very short track, so I got out even more of my plates and started making a really long track. It's not the right colors because I ran out of pieces and I didn't worry about the ground or the rails or like anything. All I focused on was just making 2 tracks for the minecart to run along. Man, that's cool. 100k likes and I'll make a track that runs all over my room. I'll even figure out how to make it turn corners, do everything. Subscribe.